Jake Morrison wiped sweat from his forehead as he watched his mining laser cut through another chunk of space rock. The asteroid belt around Kepler 442 had been his home for 3 years now. His small ship, the Lucky Strike, floated in the darkness between the stars while he worked alone day after day, breaking apart rocks to find precious metals. He was tired but happy with his simple life. Back on Earth, he had been an engineer working in big factories, fixing machines and solving problems that nobody else could figure out. But the stress had been too much. Too many meetings, too many deadlines, too many people telling him what to do. So he had saved up his money, bought this old mining ship, and flew out to the edge of known space where he could work in peace. The warning alarm on his control panel started beeping. Jake looked up from his work and checked his sensors. Something big was coming toward him, very big. He had never seen ships like these before. They moved in a pattern like birds flying together, but these were not birds. These were massive vessels that looked like they were alive. The ships had long, curved bodies that twisted and moved as they flew through space. Their hulls looked like they were covered in scales that changed color from green to gold to deep red as Jake watched. The largest ship was easily 10 times bigger than his little mining vessel. Behind it came 6 more ships, all following in a perfect line. Jake's hands shook as he reached for his communication controls. He had heard stories about aliens from other miners, but he had never believed them. Now he was looking at proof that humans were not alone in the universe. His heart pounded as he waited to see what these strange beings wanted. A voice came through his radio speakers. It was deep and rumbling like thunder rolling across the sky. The words were in English, but the accent was unlike anything Jake had ever heard. Each word seemed to have fire behind it. Human vessel, this is Elder Paraxis of the Dracorian Empire. We have traveled far to find you. Do not be afraid. We come seeking help, not to bring harm. Jake stared at his radio in shock. They knew he was human. They spoke his language, and they wanted his help. He cleared his throat and pressed the talk button. This is Jake Morrison aboard the Lucky Strike. What kind of help do you need? There was a pause before the voice answered. We need you to come with us, Jake Morrison. Our people are dying, and we have heard that humans possess wisdom that our kind lacks. Will you listen to our plea? Jake looked out at the massive ships surrounding him. He could run, but they would catch him easily. Besides, something in the alien's voice made him believe they really did need help. He had always been the kind of person who could not walk away when someone was in trouble. I'll listen, Jake said. The largest ship moved closer to his vessel. As it approached, Jake could see that it really did look like a giant dragon from the old stories his grandmother used to tell him. The ship had a long neck, powerful wings that seemed to be folded against its body, and what looked like a head with glowing eyes. A docking tube extended from the dragon ship and connected to his airlock. Jake had no choice but to trust these beings. He put on his environment suit and walked through the airlock into their ship. The inside of the alien vessel was warm and humid. The walls curved like the inside of a living creature, and soft light came from strips that looked like veins running along the ceiling. The air smelled like flowers and something else he could not identify. Elder Paraxis was waiting for him in what appeared to be a meeting room. Jake's breath caught in his throat when he saw the alien up close. Paraxis looked exactly like a dragon from Earth's mythology, but he was real and alive. He stood nearly 12 feet tall with scales that shifted from deep red to gold. His eyes were large and intelligent, and small wisps of smoke drifted from his nostrils when he breathed. Welcome aboard our vessel, Jake Morrison, Paraxis said, bowing his great head. I am honored to meet you. Jake found his voice. You look like the dragons from our old stories on Earth. Paraxis nodded slowly. Your people, and ours may have, met long ago, in the early days when both our species were young, but that is not why we have sought you out. Please sit, and I will tell you of our great tragedy. Jake sat in a chair that seemed to grow from the floor to fit his body perfectly. Paraxis settled onto a raised platform across from him, folding his wings against his sides. For thousands of years, my people have ruled a great empire among the stars, Paraxis began. We are masters of biological science. Our ships are grown, not built. Our cities are living things that care for us as we care for them. We have lived in harmony with life itself for longer than your species has existed. The great dragon paused, and Jake could see pain in his ancient eyes. But now we are dying, Paraxis continued. A plague has come to our people that we cannot cure. It turns our fire organs into crystal, stealing our breath and our life. Our greatest healers have tried everything, but nothing works. We grow weaker. Each day, Jake leaned forward. What does this have to do with me? I'm just a miner. I fix machines and break rocks. Paraxis's eyes brightened slightly. That is exactly why we need you, Jake Morrison. You fix things that are broken. You solve problems. Your people have a way of thinking that is different from ours. Where we see only one path, humans see many. Where we follow tradition, humans create new solutions. Jake felt overwhelmed. How could he help an advanced alien civilization? He was just one man with basic tools and knowledge. I don't understand, Jake said. You have technology far beyond anything humans have created. How can I possibly help you? Paraxis stood and walked to a window that looked out into space. Because sometimes the answer comes not from having more knowledge, but from seeing the problem with fresh eyes. Will you come to our world and try to help us, Jake Morrison? We have little time left. Jake looked at the magnificent being before him and made his decision. Jake's small mining ship followed the Dragon fleet through hyperspace for what felt like days. When they finally dropped back into normal space, Jake gasped at what he saw through his viewport. Dracarys Prime hung before them like a jewel against the stars, but it was unlike any planet he had ever imagined. The world was covered in vast cities that looked like they had been grown rather than built. Tall spires twisted up from the surface like enormous trees, connected by bridges that curved and flowed like vines. Gardens and forests covered every surface, and Jake could see that the buildings themselves were alive, pulsing gently with their own light. But as they got closer, Jake noticed something wrong. Many of the beautiful structures looked sick. Their light was dim, and some sections appeared to be turning gray and lifeless. The planet that should have been magnificent looked like it was slowly dying. The dragon ships landed in a clearing near one of the largest cities. Jake put on his environment suit and stepped out onto the surface of an alien world. The air was thick and warm, filled with the scent of flowers and something that reminded him of cinnamon. Gravity was lighter than Earth's, making him feel like he could jump twice as high. Elder Paraxis waited for him beside a living building that seemed to bend down to greet them. Welcome to our world, Jake Morrison. I wish you could have seen it in better times. They walked through corridors that felt more like tunnels through a massive tree than hallways in a building. The walls were covered in a soft material that glowed with gentle light, and Jake could feel a slight pulse, as if the building had a heartbeat. Plants grew from every surface, creating patterns of leaves and flowers that were more beautiful than any art he had ever seen. Your cities are alive, Jake said in wonder. Everything here is alive, Paraxis replied. We do not build things from dead materials as your people do. We grow our homes, our ships, our tools. We work with life itself to create what we need. They entered a vast chamber where dozens of dragons waited. These were the Grand Clutch, the leaders of the Dracorian people. Jake felt very small standing among these magnificent beings, each one the size of a building and covered in scales that sparkled like gems. Elder Sira approached them. She was smaller than Paraxis, but still twice Jake's height, with scales that shifted from deep blue to silver. When she spoke, her voice was like music mixed with the sound of wind through leaves. Welcome, small human, she said, bowing her head. I am Sira, chief healer of our people. I have studied this plague for many years, but it continues to defeat us. Sira led Jake and Paraxis deeper into the building, down passages that spiraled like the inside of a seashell. They came to a medical chamber where several dragons lay on beds that seemed to have grown from the floor. Jake could immediately see that these dragons were very sick, their scales, which should have been bright, and colorful were dull and gray. Strange crystal formations grew from their necks and chests, looking like clear glass pushing through their skin. The crystals pulsed with an eerie light that seemed cold and lifeless compared to the warm glow of everything else on the planet. "This is what the plague does to us," Sira explained, her voice full of sadness. "It attacks our fire organs, the parts of our bodies that create the flames we breathe. The crystals grow inside us, turning our living fire into dead stone." Jake moved closer to examine one of the sick dragons. The creature's breathing was labored, and Jake could see that where the crystals had grown, the dragon's natural scales were being pushed aside and broken. It looked incredibly painful. "How long does it take?" Jake asked. "From the first crystal to death, perhaps 6 months," Sira answered. "We have tried every treatment our science knows. Biological cures, energy healing, even surgical removal. Nothing works. The crystals always return, and they grow faster each time." Jake studied the crystal formations carefully. As an engineer, he had seen many different types of crystal growth in his work with metals and electronics. These crystals looked familiar somehow, but he could not quite place where he had seen something similar. "Tell me about your fire organs," Jake said. "How do they work?" Paraxis breathed deeply, and Jake could see his chest begin to glow with inner light. The dragon opened his mouth slightly, and a small flame danced on his tongue, hot enough that Jake could feel the heat from several feet away. "Our fire organs create plasma," Paraxis explained. "We compress gases in special chambers in our chests and heat them until they become fire. This fire gives us energy to live, power for our technology, and the ability to shape materials with our breath." Jake nodded, thinking hard. In his engineering work, he had learned about plasma and how it was contained using magnetic fields. "What keeps the plasma from burning you from the inside?" "Biological magnetic fields," Sira answered. "Our fire organs create magnetic containment fields that hold the plasma safely." Something clicked in Jake's mind. The crystal formations looked like the silicon crystals he had seen growing in certain types of electronic equipment when they malfunctioned. But why would silicon crystals be growing inside living beings? "Can I see one of the crystals up close?" Jake asked. Sira led him to a table where several crystal samples were displayed. Jake picked up one of the larger pieces and held it up to the light. The crystal was perfectly clear and had a complex internal structure that looked almost like tiny circuits. "This isn't just a random crystal," Jake said slowly. "Look at these patterns inside. They're too regular, too organized. This looks like something that was designed." The dragons looked at each other with confusion. "Designed?" Sira asked. "By whom?" Jake set the crystal down and looked at the sick dragons again. An idea was forming in his mind, but it was so different from how the dragons thought about their problem that he wasn't sure they would understand. "You've been treating this like a disease," Jake said. "But what if it's not?" "What if these crystals are some kind of technology? Something that's interfering with your fire organs?" Paraxis tilted his great head. "Technology? But the crystals grow like living things. On my world, we have learned to make technology so small you cannot see it without special tools," Jake explained. "These tiny machines can build things, including crystals. What if something like that got into your bodies?" Sira's eyes widened. "You think microscopic machines are building these crystals inside us?" Jake nodded. "It would explain why your biological treatments don't work. You're trying to cure a machine problem with medicine." The dragons fell silent, processing this new way of thinking about their plague. For thousands of years, they had only thought in terms of biology and living systems. The idea that their problem might be mechanical was completely foreign to them. "If you are correct," Paraxis said finally, "then we need a mechanical solution, not a biological one." Jake looked around at the living city, the organic technology, the dragons themselves. Everything here was based on life and growth. The dragons had never developed the kind of mechanical engineering that humans took for granted. "That's where I might be able to help," Jake said. "I know machines. I know how to break them when they're not working properly." For the first time since he had arrived, Jake saw hope in the dragon's eyes. Jake spent the next week studying everything he could about dragon biology and their technology. The dragons gave him access to their vast libraries, which were not books but living memory banks that grew from the walls and shared knowledge through touch. When Jake placed his hand on these organic computers, information flowed directly into his mind. He learned that the dragon's fire organs were incredibly complex. They worked like fusion reactors containing plasma at temperatures hot enough to melt steel. The magnetic fields that held this plasma in place were generated by specialized cells that worked together like living electromagnets. It was beautiful and amazing, but also completely different from any technology humans had ever developed. The more Jake studied, the more convinced he became that his theory was correct. The crystal formations were not random growths but carefully constructed machines, so small that millions of them could fit on the head of a pin. These nano-machines were designed to interfere with the dragon's magnetic containment fields, causing the plasma to cool and crystallize, but understanding the problem was only half the battle. Now Jake had to figure out how to solve it, and that meant combining human mechanical engineering with dragon biological science in a way that had never been tried before. Jake set up a workshop in one of the medical chambers, bringing together tools and materials from both his mining ship and the dragon facilities. The dragons watched with fascination as he worked with metal, plastic, and electronic components. They had never seen anyone build things from non-living materials. "Your people create dead things and make them work," observed Ember, Sira's daughter. She was younger than the other dragons, only about 50 years old, and more curious about new ideas than the elders. "We don't think of them as dead," Jake explained as he assembled a microscope from spare parts. "We think of them as tools. They don't grow or change on their own, but they do exactly what we designed them to do, every time." Jake's plan was ambitious and risky. He wanted to create tiny machines that could enter the dragon's bodies and hunt down the crystal building. Nanomachines. But these hunter machines would have to be grown using dragon biotechnology so they wouldn't be rejected by the dragon's immune systems. The challenge was teaching the dragon's biological systems to create mechanical devices. It was like trying to get a tree to grow metal fruit or asking a flower to produce electronic circuits. Elder Paraxis was skeptical. "We have never combined living tissue with dead materials," he said. "Our entire philosophy is based on working with life, not against it." "I'm not asking you to work against life," Jake replied. "I'm asking you to expand your definition of what life can create." Jake started small, working with Sira to modify the dragon's biofabrication systems. These were specialized organs that could grow almost anything the dragons needed, from tools to clothing to building materials. Jake wanted to teach these organs to incorporate metals and electronic components into their biological creations. The first attempts failed completely. The biofabricators rejected the foreign materials, treating them like toxins to be eliminated. But Jake was patient and persistent. He had spent years solving impossible engineering problems, and he knew that every failure taught him something useful. The breakthrough came when Jake realized he was thinking about the problem backwards. Instead of trying to force the dragon's biology to accept mechanical parts, he needed to make the mechanical parts more like biology. Working with Ember, who was eager to try new approaches, Jake developed a new type of nano-machine that was part biological and part mechanical. The biological parts would allow it to survive inside a dragon's body and communicate with the dragon's immune system. The mechanical parts would give it the tools needed to dismantle the crystal-building invaders. "It's like creating a new type of white blood cell," Jake explained to the gathered dragons, "but one that can think and use tools." The hybrid nanomachines took weeks to design and grow. Jake had to learn to think like a biologist while still applying his engineering knowledge. He had to consider how his tiny machines would get energy, how they would navigate through the dragon's bodies, and how they would identify their targets without harming healthy tissue. The dragons, meanwhile, had to learn to think like engineers. Jake taught them about redundancy, the idea of having backup systems in case something failed. He showed them how to test and improve their designs through trial and error. Most importantly, he taught them to question their assumptions and try approaches that had never been attempted before. Your people have been solving problems the same way for thousands of years, Jake told the Grand Clutch during one of their planning sessions. Sometimes the best solution comes from doing something completely different. Elder Sira was the first to truly understand what Jake was proposing. You want us to create warrior cells that fight like machines but live like dragons. Exactly, Jake said. And once we prove this works, you can adapt the same principles to solve other problems. You can create biological systems that think mechanically, or mechanical systems that grow and adapt like living things. When the first batch of hybrid nano-machines was ready, they looked nothing like anything either species had created before. Under Jake's microscope, they appeared as tiny, translucent creatures with metallic cores. They moved with purpose, following programmed instructions while also responding to biological signals. The question now was whether they would work inside a living dragon, and whether a dragon would be brave enough to try them. Ember volunteered immediately. She had been fascinated by Jake's work from the beginning, and she was one of the few dragons who was not afraid of combining biology with mechanical systems. I trust your solution, Jake Morrison, she said. Our old ways are not working. It is time to try something new. Sira was terrified for her daughter, but she also knew that without some kind of breakthrough, Ember and all the other dragons would die anyway. The plague was spreading faster now, and their traditional treatments were becoming completely ineffective. Jake prepared the nano-machines for injection, his hands steady despite the enormous pressure he felt. If his solution worked, it could save an entire species. If it failed, he might kill the first dragon brave enough to trust him. The nano-machines will take several hours to spread through your system, Jake explained to Ember as Sira prepared the injection site. You should start to feel different as they begin working. If anything feels wrong, tell us immediately. Ember nodded calmly. I am ready. Sira injected the hybrid nano-machines into a major blood vessel near Ember's fire organs. Now all they could do was wait and see if Jake's impossible combination of human engineering and dragon biology would work. For the first few hours, nothing seemed to happen. Ember rested comfortably while Jake monitored her vital signs with instruments he had adapted from both human and dragon technology. The other dragons gathered around, watching anxiously for any sign of success or failure. Then, as the sun set over Dracarys Prime, Ember's scales began to change color, shifting from their normal blue-silver to a brilliant gold that pulsed with inner light. Ember's transformation was more dramatic than anyone had expected. As Jake's hybrid nano-machines spread through her body, they did not just eliminate the crystal infections. They integrated with her biological systems, creating something entirely new. The young dragon's scales now shimmered with patterns of gold and silver that seemed to pulse with electrical energy. When she breathed, small sparks danced around her nostrils, and her fire organs glowed brighter than they ever had before. Most amazingly, the crystals that had been growing in her chest began to dissolve, but instead of simply disappearing, they were absorbed and transformed into new biological structures. I feel different, Ember said, her voice carrying harmonics. That had not been there before. Stronger, clearer, I can sense things I never noticed before. Jake ran test after test, monitoring every aspect of Ember's biology. What he discovered amazed him. The hybrid nano-machines had not just cured the crystal plague. They had created a new type of immune system that was part biological and part mechanical, capable of adapting to threats that pure biology could never handle. Your fire organs are operating at nearly twice their normal efficiency, Jake told the gathered dragons. The nano-machines have integrated with your magnetic containment fields, making them more stable and powerful. Elder Sira examined her daughter with wonder and concern. Are you still my child, or have you become something else? Ember nuzzled her mother gently. I am still me, mother. But I am also more than I was before. The humans' machines have not replaced parts of me. They have made all of me better. Over the following days, Ember's abilities continued to develop. She discovered she could control her fire with precision that no dragon had ever achieved. She could create different types of plasma, from gentle warmth that could heal injuries to focused beams that could cut through solid rock. Most impressive of all, she could generate electromagnetic fields strong enough to move metal objects without touching them. Word of Ember's transformation spread throughout the Dragon City, and then to other cities around the planet. Dragons who had been dying from the Crystal Plague began arriving, hoping to receive Jake's treatment. But there were also dragons who came out of curiosity, wanting to see this new fusion of biology and mechanical engineering. Elder Paraxis was among the first to volunteer for treatment. "If this is the future of our people," he said, "then I will help lead them into it." Jake worked tirelessly to produce more hybrid nano-machines, teaching the dragons biofabrication systems to create them in larger quantities. Each batch was an improvement over the last, as Jake refined his design and the dragons learned to optimize their biological manufacturing processes. The treatment process became more efficient as well. What had taken hours with Ember now took only minutes for other dragons. Jake realized that the nano-machines were learning and adapting, sharing information between different dragon hosts to improve their effectiveness. But the most significant change was not biological. It was cultural. Young dragons like Ember began experimenting with Jake's engineering principles, applying mechanical thinking to their biological technology. They created hybrid ships that combined the living flexibility of traditional dragon vessels with the precision and reliability of mechanical systems. These new ships could regenerate damage like living creatures, while maintaining perfect navigation and communication systems. The hybrid ships were faster and more efficient than anything the dragons had built before. They could survive in hostile environments that would have killed traditional biological ships, and they could be modified and upgraded in ways that had never been possible with purely living technology. Jake found himself at the center of a technological revolution. Dragons who had lived for centuries according to ancient traditions were suddenly eager to learn human engineering concepts. They wanted to understand redundancy, systematic testing, modular design, and all the other principles that humans took for granted. "You have given us more than a cure for our plague," Elder Paraxis told Jake during one of their planning sessions. "You have given us a new way of thinking about problems." The transformed dragons developed capabilities that neither species could have achieved alone. They could shape matter with their breath while simultaneously controlling it with electromagnetic fields. They could grow biological computers that processed information using both organic neural networks and electronic circuits. They could create materials that were alive but followed predictable mechanical properties. Jake established the first interspecies workshop on Dracarys Prime, a place where human engineering principles were taught alongside dragon biological science. Dragons learned to build and test mechanical devices, while Jake learned to work with living materials that could grow and adapt. The workshop became a center of innovation that attracted dragons from across their empire. They came not just seeking treatment for the Crystal Plague, but wanting to learn this new hybrid approach to technology and problem-solving. Elder Sira, initially the most cautious about Jake's radical treatments, became one of his strongest supporters after receiving the nano-machines herself. Her medical knowledge, combined with her new mechanical understanding, led to breakthroughs in healing that helped dragons throughout their empire. "I spent decades learning to work with life," she told Jake. "Now I am learning to work with the partnership between life and machines. It is like discovering a new sense I never knew I was missing." The transformation was not without its challenges. Some older dragons struggled to accept the changes, fearing that their people were losing their essential nature. There were debates and disagreements about how far the integration with mechanical systems should go, but as more dragons received treatment and developed new capabilities, the benefits became impossible to ignore. The hybrid dragons were healthier, stronger, and more capable than any dragon in their recorded history. They could survive in environments that would have been lethal before, and they could accomplish tasks that pure biology or pure mechanics could never achieve. Jake often marveled at what they had accomplished together. He had come to help cure a plague, but he had ended up catalyzing the evolution of an entire civilization. The dragons had not lost their essential nature. Instead, they had expanded it, becoming something greater than they had ever been before. The crystal plague was now completely eliminated from the dragon population. Every dragon who received treatment not only recovered but gained the new hybrid immune system that made them resistant to similar attacks in the future. But more importantly, they had gained a new perspective on what was possible when different approaches to problem-solving were combined. As Jake watched young dragons experimenting with hybrid technologies they had created themselves, he realized that this was just the beginning. The dragons were no longer limited by their traditional biological approach to technology. They could now imagine and create solutions that combined the best of both worlds, and their imagination was the only limit to what they might achieve. 1 year after Jake first arrived on Dracoris Prime, the transformation of the dragon civilization was complete. What had begun as a desperate search for a cure had become the foundation for an entirely new type of society that combined the best aspects of both human and dragon thinking. The planet itself reflected this change. The living cities now incorporated mechanical systems that made them more efficient and resilient. Buildings could still grow and adapt like living things, but they also featured precise environmental controls, advanced communication networks, and backup systems that ensured nothing important would ever be lost to accident or disease. Jake stood on a balcony overlooking the main city, watching hybrid ships take off and land in patterns that were both organic and precisely coordinated. Each ship was unique, grown according to its owner's needs but incorporating standardized mechanical components that ensured reliability and compatibility. Elder Paraxis joined him, his scales now bearing the same golden patterns that marked all the transformed dragons. "It is hard to believe that 1 year ago we were a dying people," the ancient dragon said. "Now we are stronger than we have ever been." The Dracorian Empire had indeed been transformed. Where once there had been isolated worlds connected only by biological ships that took months to travel between systems, there was now a network of hybrid vessels that could traverse vast distances in weeks. Communication that had once relied on slow biological messengers now happened instantly through mechanical relay systems grown into the living ships. But the most important change was philosophical. The dragons had abandoned their rigid traditionalism and embraced a culture of innovation and experimentation. They actively sought out new ideas and different perspectives, understanding that diversity of thought led to better solutions. Jake had been appointed as the first human ambassador to the Dracorian Empire, a position that had been created specifically for him. His role was to continue teaching human engineering principles while learning from dragon biological science. But he had also become something more, a bridge between two very different ways of understanding the universe. The alliance between humans and dragons had benefits for both species. The dragons shared their advanced biological technologies with Earth, revolutionizing human medicine and space travel. Humans no longer needed to build spaceships from metal and plastic. They could grow them from materials that self-repaired and adapted to changing conditions. Meanwhile, dragons gained access to human manufacturing techniques and electronic systems that amplified their natural abilities far beyond what they had thought possible. The combination of dragon biotechnology and human engineering created solutions that neither species could have developed alone. Jake's workshop had expanded into the Interspecies Academy, a vast complex where beings from both civilizations worked together on projects that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Young dragons learned to think like engineers while human students discovered the principles of biological design. The Academy's greatest success was the development of hybrid exploration vessels that could support both human and dragon crews. These ships could venture into environments that would have been lethal to either species alone, opening up new regions of space for exploration and colonization. Captain Betty Ross, one of the first human officers to serve aboard a dragon human hybrid ship, often visited the Academy to share her experiences. Working with dragons has changed how I think about everything, she told Jake during one of her visits. They see possibilities where we see only problems, and we provide structure where they see only chaos. The partnership had also attracted attention from other alien species in the galaxy. News of the Dragon-Human Alliance spread through Interstellar. Trade networks and representatives from dozens of different civilizations came to Drake Carey's, primed to see this unprecedented cooperation between two species. Many of these visiting aliens were amazed by what they found. Most species in the galaxy maintained strict isolation, believing that their own approach to technology and society was superior to all others. The idea that two species could not only work together but actually become stronger by combining their different perspectives was revolutionary. Jake found himself serving as a teacher and advisor to aliens from across the galaxy. He helped a crystalline species learn mechanical engineering principles, while their knowledge of mineral formation improved dragon biofabrication techniques. A race of energy beings shared their understanding of plasma dynamics, leading to improvements in dragonfire organ efficiency. The Interspecies Academy became a gathering place for beings who wanted to learn from each other rather than compete. It represented a new model for how different civilizations could interact, based on cooperation and mutual benefit rather than dominance and isolation. Elder Sierra, now the head of medical research at the Academy, had developed treatments for diseases that affected dozens of different species. By combining dragon biological expertise with human systematic approach and alien medical knowledge, she created solutions that no single species could have discovered alone. Jake taught us that our greatest strength comes not from our individual abilities, but from our willingness to learn from others, she explained to a group of visiting diplomats. This principle applies to a species just as much as it applies to individuals. The success of the alliance had also changed human society. Earth's government had established new departments focused on interspecies cooperation and hybrid technology development. Human engineers who had once worked only with mechanical systems now studied biological design principles, while biologists learned engineering concepts that helped them understand living systems in new ways. Jake often received messages from his old colleagues on Earth, expressing amazement at the reports they received about his work. The quiet engineer who had fled to the asteroid belt to avoid corporate stress had become one of the most important figures in human-alien relations, but Jake remained humble about his role in these changes. "I didn't create this alliance," he would tell people who praised his achievements. "I just helped two groups of people realize they could learn from each other." The dragons did all the hard work of changing their entire civilization. The truth was more complex. Jake's willingness to think outside established patterns had been the catalyst that allowed both species to break free from limiting assumptions. His human perspective had shown the dragons that their biological approach was not the only way to solve problems, while the dragons had taught humans that living systems could be more flexible and adaptive than any machine. As Jake watched a group of young dragons and humans working together on a new type of hybrid technology in the workshop below, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had started as a lonely miner breaking apart asteroids for precious metals. Now he was part of a partnership that was reshaping the galaxy, the crystal plague that had threatened to destroy. The dragon civilization was now completely forgotten, replaced by hybrid immune systems that made all dragons healthier and stronger than their ancestors. But more importantly, the crisis had forced both species to question their assumptions and discover new possibilities. The title that the dragons had given to Jake's story had proven prophetic. They had asked a human for help with a medical problem, never imagining that the solution would transform their entire civilization and forge an alliance that would influence the development of the galaxy for generations to come. Jake smiled as he watched the next generation of humans and dragons learning to work together as naturally as breathing. This was what the future looked like, not the dominance of one species over others, but the cooperation of many different perspectives working together to solve problems that none could handle alone.